Alright, hey there guys, gals, and non-binary mycophiles. MycoChaotix here. Today, I will be harvesting my first tub of Ethnogen Explosion, gifted to me by a dear friend. This strain's origin and lineage are not well known, but the fruits seem to be quite vigorous and have very nice colorations, while seeming quick to mature to flat wavy caps within hours of maturity. I intend to obtain swabs of spores from the mature fruits and will set up spore prints on tinfoil off camera. I've let the fruits mature a little more than usual, so there are some caps covered with spores. I don't really care about that. You can actually swab the spores off the sibling fruits, and if there are no surface contaminants, it should be a clean swab. I am doing this in front of a laminar flow hood, using isopropyl alcohol and gloved hands. Which, if you don't have a laminar flow hood, a still air box works just as good. You want a space to do your myco work that has the least possible contamination potential. Now we're about to do a first reveal. Bam. These fruits are very pretty. So at this point I'm unwrapping the swab. I use nasal pharyngeal swabs that are individually packaged and sterile, one-time use swabs. I do this in front of the flow hood. I find that I have minimal contam, and if I open and close the swab packet in front of the hood, as close to the laminar's flow's strongest output, the swabs can be put back in their packets and sealed via folding the open top and placed in like a sanitized quart jar with a desiccant packet in it. With spores on swabs, you can essentially treat the swab as potentially being able to inoculate 4 agar plates. At least 4 is what I do personally. But you essentially do one plate and you do a Z pattern with one side of the swab. Then you rotate it 25% in one direction and do a Z swab on a new plate. And then rotate it again, Z swab on a new plate, rotate it a 4th time, Z swab on a new plate. And then use those plates as your stock plates. And then that maximizes the use of the spore swab. Know that if you have even a little black speck, that's like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of spores, and dark specks can be millions of spores. So these swabs are very good ways to store genetics, if that's something you prefer. I realized pretty quickly that my usual chemical-resistant rubber gloves were not going to do well in the tight confines of this 6-quart shoebox. And just with the spacing of the fruits and then having to like twist the spore or the swab in your fingers with those gloves is kind of a difficult motion to complete. So I'll essentially step off from the camera briefly and switch one of my gloves to a nitrile one-time use glove. It's pretty good solution. I mean, just generally gloving your hand is a good solution to help reducing contamination. A lot of people, or some people, will use like bare hands, and maybe they will like spray their own hands. You do have to be careful with isopropyl on your skin because it does get absorbed, and if you get it in like your eyes or in parts of your body that it can absorb into easily, it can give you a very negative reaction, kind of like being very drunk very quickly, which also has the potential to be fatal. So you gotta be careful with fumes, always careful with fumes, bleach fumes, isopropyl alcohol fumes. Don't underestimate that at all. So at this point, I observe and mentally note that the fruits are not very clustered in their pin spread. Single fruits mostly with minimal cluster fruits. These fruits were about 5 inches tall, roughly. They had very beautiful golden coloration that one would expect from a Cubensis strain. Notably, these fruits dropped veils and began to furl upward. Their cap began to furl upward in a ripping wavy cap on some of the mature fruits within like 6 to 10 hours of my noticing that the veils dropped at all. In other words, they were quite fast-moving fruits. I think the wavy cap, it's light brown, then has like a white exterior outline, coupled with the dark brown center point of the dorsal part of the cap, are quite appealing visually. I'm going to continue to take swabs from fruits as I pick them. That's a part of the reason I let this tub go, and why you can see, spores on other fruits and within the tub. Now when I'm doing these swabs, I'm really just focused on getting the spores and then getting out. Like getting in, getting out, and then putting that shit back in the packets. Because the swabs are not necessarily multiple time use, but in doing it the way that I do it, I think that the contamination potential for the swabs is very minimal. And when you fold the top part of the sleeves down, once you put the spore back in, the swab back in, it creates a relatively airtight seal. You could tape it. I don't really tape it when I have them in my quart jars, but when I take them out, for other kinds of storage or shipping or something, I would tape them down in some way or fold them very tightly at least. I'm just showing off the fruits that I'm plucking. I'm trying to make it so that the camera focuses on them so that you guys can see it. I really enjoy observing the fruits of my labors, and holding the fruits in your hand and kind of being able to look at them and observe different characteristic traits, phenotypes, growth characteristics, both in the mycelium and the mushrooms themselves is a fun endeavor. Observation. I always suggest notations. Keep a journal. Use a code. Make sure you keep a master key of what your code means, because as you expand your library with all kinds of spores, I'm really enjoying working with gourmets, trying to get successful gourmets. And you've probably seen some of the little bits of caps that I've harvested and put in the my tray. That's because you can still use the broken bits of the caps for spore prints. I use them to make fun designs on my spore prints, but it's surprising maybe in that the cap is not attached to the stipe anymore. It's just a broken piece of cap, and it still does its function, its sporulation kind of function and mechanism, which is a whole other topic and very interesting. Now I'm just using a kind of plug and twist method, As you can see here, there are spore droppings on the substrate on the mycelial mat. This isn't really a bad thing, but I do tend to cover my tub surfaces with a fresh casing layer after the first flush, just to cover exposed spores and also tears and any fruiting stumps that are left over or any torn up substrate, all in efforts to reduce contamination, waiting for a second flush. You can soak your blocks. I do that sometimes, other times I don't. I find the casing layer just lets the block kind of do its second flush naturally, and you know, dunking and soaking does help you get bigger fruits, so there is that, because mushrooms are 90% water, at least. Now this is a pretty big cluster that I picked up, and if you watch how when I plucked it, I was trying to focus on the best ways to reduce damage of any second flush pens and minimize substrate tearing as I harvest the fruits. Now, something worth noting, spores can be attractive to fungal mites, I believe, and possibly different types of insects. I'm not quite sure, but I know that that is another reason to not let your fruits normally sporulate everywhere. You know, I let it happen. I kind of enjoy it, you know, fuck it. I really enjoy the way these fruits grew, generally kind of separate individual fruits or duo clusters. Very firm, hardy fruit bodies and stipes. I always enjoy the patterns that are on tops of fruits, and the fact that when these fruits are sporulating, they sporulate in such a way and strong enough for the spores to eject upwards and onto the tops of their own caps. Like, I fucking love mushrooms. Now I have another tub that I recently harvested and recorded of P. Natalensis, and the spore designs on those fruits are like fucking beautiful. I'm very excited to kind of try to create content in this way. I like hearing myself talk. I think a little bit, if I'm being honest, admitting the chaos. But I just enjoy fungi, if you're European, I think. Now, when I'm harvesting these fruits that are these multiple clusters, I'm always just trying to gently lift it at its base, so that the mycelium that's holding that specific cluster to the substrate is pulled up and not torn up with the substrate. This hobby is all about experimentation, experience, and acquisition of knowledge, and utilizing knowledge and learning from mistakes. So consider doing things that I suggest, but don't just take it from me. You know, do it yourself. Do variations of things. Test things. One of my favorite main components of this hobby is agar work and genetic experimentation, which is something that I'm currently working on in my current 15 or 16 month journey, myco-journey. Now you'll notice some of the fruits caps have kind of been knocked off during harvest. This is pretty normal. I probably could have been more gentle with these fruits possibly, but I don't think I was being very aggressive. I'm generally very firm with my fruits. You'll learn as you do this hobby more over time and feel and harvest different fruits by hand, that even the softest, squishiest fruits are rather firm, just in terms of the way they're attached to the substrate or their actual like exterior tissue consistency. And and again, 90% water. Once you dehydrate, you get it down to cracker dry. That's the for me personally, the ideal way to store the mushrooms that I harvest. I normally do like 135 Fahrenheit dehydrator in an air fryer and on dehydrate for like 18 hours, 20 hours. And that generally works for most of the fruits. I've done apes and golden halo and albino riptide and blue ape revert and now Mazaptec, and this video is Ethnogen Explosion, and most recently the psilocybin Natalensis, which is it's just my favorite of the different mushrooms that I've worked with recently. It actually is a separately identified species from Natal, South Africa, but that's a different video. At this point, I'm just finishing harvesting this tub. See how dark the spore droppings are on the 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock if you're looking down at the tub from where I'm looking, just the way it's presented. Very dark patches. This is again 6 hours after I noticed that there were veils tearing. I was able to get a good dozen spore prints out of this tub. I find that the bigger caps that are adequately matured and maybe haven't dropped heavily, and even the ones that dropped heavily, they seem to still be dropping. They drop at least 1 or 2 prints. I just used tinfoil rubbed down with isopropyl, left to dry, and then the cap with the stipe removed at the kind of interjunction of the stipe and cap gills down on the tinfoil with a cup or something on top of it. You can put a droplet of water on the cap to keep it hydrated while it's sporulating. I like to let my prints sit for maybe 16 to 18 hours to really ensure that I get a high quality, heavy spore load of a drop on the tinfoil. I do my tinfoil cutouts about a 1/4 inch further out and further up than the diameter or the radius of the mushroom cap, so that I can fold it in half and then half essentially, or in quarters and quarters, without covering or necessarily exposing the spore print itself to possible contamination on my hands. Make sure you're doing isopropyl spray maybe every 10 to 15 minutes as you're doing things. Even if you have a flow hood, even if you have a still air box, you want to, anytime your hands are away from your sterile area, you need to consider sanitizing them in some way, while being considerate of safety, precautions. At this point, I'm just putting down a CVG casing layer that's at field capacity, covering up any exposed stumps that I've left, or any bruised or broken substrate, or any dropped spores, all in reducing contamination, like I've noted earlier in the video. And I may sprinkle it around the juvenile fruits that were left over that, technically may be part of the first flush, and I probably should have plucked them, but I left them for the second flush. This tub ultimately kind of had a couple of fruits, another dozen fruits or so, popping out of the casing layer that I put down after a few days, and then, got another harvest, probably half the size of the first flush, which is fine. I'm not a size queen on my flushes. I'm going to do some photos at the end of this in the next few seconds of these fruits, a sneak peek of the P. Natalensis fruits, and just a brief plug for engaging with my social media. And the psilocybin natalensis. The mycelium of this specific species was insane to bring out, and there's some cool deformities. If you like my content or want to see more, please like, follow, and subscribe. My Tumblr is MycoChaotix, MycoChaotix. My Instagram is myco_chaotix, myco_chaotix. And my Reddit username is dry_cardiologist8370. I'm open to DMs for information, advice, or just to generally discuss mycology related things in general. I'm a whore for contamination, so feel free to hit me up. All right, talk to y'all soon. Much love, mycophiles. Till next time, MycoChaotix, signing off.